Greetings. Welcome to the Militant Negro YouTube channel. My name is JB, and I'm what's known as a Militant Negro. And I'm going to take a few minutes and read an article written by Mr. Shaun King, who writes for the New York Daily News. Mr. King writes, in the past 5 days, 3 white men shot 6 cops and 3 other white men are on trial for violence against Negroes. And he goes on to say, over this past week, excuse me, more than any week I can ever remember, the United States is having to face its true demons with white violence, white supremacy, and police brutality. While the racist stereotype of American violence continues to be that of a young black man in a hoodie, the reality on the ground simply looks so much different, writes Mr. King. He continues, 2 Iowa police officers were killed early Wednesday in a pair of ambush-style murders. Before the suspect was identified, some people rushed to social media to blame Black Lives Matter. The accused killer turned out to be a Confederate flag-waving supporter of Donald Trump, a Caucasian man named Scott Michael Green. That's who is arrested and in prison or jail right now for those 2 Iowa cop executions. Just a few weeks prior to the shooting, Mr. Green had proudly placed a Trump sign in his front yard. A week before that, he was kicked out of a local high school football game for waving a Confederate flag in the face of Negro fans. On this past Friday, 2 more police officers were shot outside of St. Louis, Missouri by a 52-year-old Caucasian man named Noel Kluber, Jr. after an armed standoff at the mobile home park where Mr. Kluber lived. Unlike the shooting in Iowa, both officers survived. Now, Mr. King continues, on Sunday evening in rural Georgia, it happened again. Another angry Caucasian man ambushed law enforcement officers. Mr. Ralph Elrod, seen and hearing his Negro neighbors ride around on 4-wheelers, reportedly decided to leave the house and threatened to kill them. When the neighbors called authorities, Mr. Elrod fatally shot one deputy and seriously wounded another, says officials. Now, Mr. King continues, in the span of 5 days, 3 white men shot at least 6 different officers. Beyond their whiteness, each shooter has one clear thing in common. Wait for it. They are still alive. That's wild to me, Mr. King writes, because unarmed African Americans are far too often shot and killed by police because those officers claim that they feared for their safety. But all 3 of these suspects are still alive to face charges despite having fired their weapons at police. The majority of people who shoot and kill police in this country are white men. Mr. King continues, we've crossed the threshold where blaming Black Lives Matter or President Obama for the violence faced by police in this country is about as ridiculous as letting a pedophile host a sleepover with young teenage daughters. Now those are Mr. King's words, not mine. In addition to these 3 horrific shootings, Mr. King continues, 3 different trials and court hearings are being held this week for white men who shot and killed unarmed, nonviolent Negro people in Ohio and South Carolina. Monday was supposed to be the first day of jury selection in the trial of the white supremacist Dylann Roof, who was charged with fatally shooting 9 African Americans at the historic Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, last year. Instead of jury selection starting, it was delayed while the judge considers a motion filed by the defense team, which is causing everyone who is following this case a great deal of anxiety. This shooting by Dylan Roof was the deadliest hate crime against African Americans in over 75 years. Yeah, he was a lot. He was taking alive people, and they stopped at Burger King for him to get a Big Mac. I mean, a Whopper or whatever the hell. Anyway, Mr. King continues. Meanwhile, the trial of Officer Michael Slager, who repeatedly shot Walter Scott in the back and killed him as Mr. Walter Scott was running away from Michael Slager, is also underway, right up the road in North Charleston, South Carolina. Few cases appear to be as cut and dry as this one, Mr. King writes. A bystander filmed it. Scott was unarmed, and we clearly witnessed Slager repeatedly shooting him in the back. But cases that appear to be cut and dried with a white police officer and a Negro victim are never quite what they seem, Mr. King writes. Of all the cases of police violence against unarmed Negroes, none seems to be a clearly winnable one as this case is. Yeah, when pigs fly. Lastly, Officer Ray Tenzing is currently on trial for the murder of the unarmed motorist Sam Dubois, who was shot and killed by Tenzing during a routine traffic stop in Cincinnati, Ohio. Dubois, who wasn't speeding or swerving, was allegedly pulled over because his vehicle didn't have a license plate on the front of the car. It was properly registered and had the plate in the back. Frankly, Mr. King writes, it seemed like a classic case of racial profiling. Within 90 seconds of being pulled over, Tenzing shot and killed Sam Dubois and concocted a fanciful story on why it all happened. Thankfully, the body camera wildly contradicted his story. As the trial began, it was recently revealed that Officer Tenzing was wearing a Confederate flag t-shirt under his uniform. Wow. This means that in at least 3 of these 6 cases, the Iowa police shootings, the case of Dylan Roof, and the murder of Sam Dubois, the perpetrators of the violence each had an affinity for the Confederate flag. Thus ends the story from Mr. Shaun King of the New York Daily News. Now, this is all troubling. You know, it's all very troubling. It's all very horrific. These men, these Caucasian terrorists, racists, thugs, because that's what they are, they took the life of police officers in the line of duty. None of these officers were off duty. They were clearly police officers in marked vehicles wearing police uniforms. And they were executed by these Caucasian terrorist, racist thugs. And by the way, no media that is covering this, and there are very few covering it actually, no media that is covering these executions of law enforcement personnel are calling these men terrorists, thugs, racists, any of that. Now, had they been people of color who shot these cops, they would have been called thugs, gangsters, members of Black Lives Matter movement. These were the labels that would have been hung on these perpetrators of violence against law enforcement had they been people of color, specifically Negroes. If you don't believe me, just look back at all the killings that have happened of law enforcement officers in the past 5 years that involve people of color. Media and police unions always try to tie the murder of a police officer to somebody in Black Lives Movement if the perpetrator is a person of color. What's troubling about this is that police officers use the excuse, and it must be in a rule book somewhere, that when they kill an unarmed suspect who happens to be a person of color, their first line of defense is, I feared for my life. I thought he was going to kill me. Well, you get trained in the academy to be ready and anticipate these situations. You are put out there in the street to serve and protect citizens of all races, of all religions. And you're not put out there to shoot first and ask questions never. That is not your purpose for being armed and in the street. You are there to serve and protect and get to the bottom of situations that could turn deadly. You don't go into a situation guns blazing because you fear for your life. When you sign up to be a police officer, your life is in danger every day. That is part of the job. If you can't deal with it, if it makes you fearful, don't be a police officer. Get a job shoveling shit for the city. But these white terrorist, thug, racist killers who killed police officers, the ones who arrested them, were not fearful of their lives when confronting men who just killed one of their own. They take these terrorists into custody alive. Not a scratch on them. No black eyes, no contusions, no bruising, no broken limbs, nothing. Not even a split lip. These guys are arrested who have just killed law enforcement and treated like royalty. And the only conclusion I can come to is because they have Caucasian skin. Because when you think about it, a person of color walking down the street, minding their business, is shot dead by law enforcement because the law enforcement officer feared for his life when facing an unarmed person of color. Yet he does not kill a suspect of Caucasian persuasion who just shot dead one of his own brethren. The world is watching. Yeah, the world is watching and doing nothing. Nobody is doing anything. Obama, silent. His Department of Justice, silent. The FBI, who works for us, ensuring the safety of us, does nothing. How long do we let this go on? How long do we allow ourselves to be executed in the street because we look different than the average Caucasian Joe? In a lot of these states where people of color are slain in the street and the excuse is used that I feared for my life, or I thought he had a weapon, or he had a weapon, these states have open carry laws where it is permissible, it is allowed, it is legal for a person of color to have a weapon, even if they don't have one and you lie as a cop and say they do. They are allowed to have one legally. And you don't know if they are legally allowed to have a weapon until you check it out. And you can't check it out when you're shooting at them to kill them. When you walk up on somebody in their car and they have a weapon in that car, it just might damn well be legal. They might be allowed by law to have it. So shooting first and asking questions never should not be an option. We shouldn't allow this to continue to happen, people. These excuses law enforcement use to kill people of color in the street, in their homes, is ridiculously stupid and inadequate as a way of an explanation. These Caucasian terrorist thug racists who just killed all these law enforcement officers and got away with it to be arrested alive is a direct indication that when a Negro person of color is shot in the streets, they're not shot because the cop fears for his life. They are shot because the cop knows he can do this. He can get a paid vacation when it's done. He can come back from that paid vacation, maybe get a promotion. He might get an accommodation. He will get a lot of backslapping from his brothers in the thin blue line community. But he won't get a conviction. He won't get fired. He won't end up in prison because the American just us system supports his actions. I mean, think about it. How many of you who are listening to my voice right now have really read or watched any of these reports of these Caucasian thug terrorist racists killing law enforcement? How many of you have seen these stories on your television? How many of you have read these stories in your newspapers, if you still read a newspaper? How many have seen anything about this? Any place except online in social media. Or when a person of color such as Shaun takes the time to write about it in his newspaper. We need to hold the police department in America accountable for what they do. They are killing people for no other reason than these people have colored skin. They are executing humans in the streets of America and getting away with it. And nobody is holding police accountable. And police officers, prosecutors, everybody in the justice system band together and lie to cover for each other. And we as American citizens, or you as American citizens, since I don't live there anymore, you allow this. You're quiet. You're busy watching reality TV. You're busy going to clubs and clubbing, not realizing that when you come out that club, you might be a victim of Negro genocide by cops. We don't have our focus anywhere. People are criticizing Black Lives Matter when they should be applauding the work Black Lives Matter is doing. They are helping bring attention, shed a spotlight on the problem of Negro person of color genocide in America. Without Black Lives Matter, how many young people would be out there protesting and marching and bringing attention to what's going on in their community? You can be negative about Black Lives Matter if you want, but they are vitally necessary in this day and age because nobody else is out there trying to stop what's happening to people of color. We got to wake up. We got to become united as one to fight systematic racism in America. We have to band together. If you're not going to march and sing and carry signs, at least stop criticizing those who do. Stop being a pawn and a tool and a house coon for racism. Be proud to say, no, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I'm sick and tired of it. My heart goes out to the families who have lost loved ones because of murder by cop. I feel your pain. Enjoy yourselves. Be well. Be safe. Namaste. And let's just band together and be united, people.